Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about the patient perspective. How to be a better patient, how to prepare for your appointments, advice for during appointments, how to advocate for yourself, and just other general tips on how to make your doctor's appointments go more smoothly and be more productive. Oop, sorry ring. You guys know that I've been to my fair share of dismissive doctors and I've had a really hard time getting all of my symptoms actually looked at, tested for, diagnosed, all the things that you expect that the doctor will do when you go in. It turns out you sort of need to fight for that to happen. I wish we lived in a world where this video didn't need to exist, but I think that it's really important for it to because this is the world that we live in. Instead of me just giving you the advice that I could think of, in my video last week, I decided to ask you guys to submit the advice that you guys think that I should be giving on this video. So you'll notice that some of this advice will be from me, stuff that I've said before. Some of this advice will be stuff from you guys. So as you're listening to this, know that this isn't all necessarily my opinion. I don't necessarily agree with all of it, but I think that it's important to mention because different people are going to enjoy different tactics. Some of the advice even contradicts the other advice because there are pros and cons to every approach. So you're going to need to take what you like, cherry pick the advice that you think will help you in your situation with your temperament and your doctor. And hopefully this will help you get better results on your next appointment. I know I look a little bit more formal than usual today, but it's literally just because of this shirt. I'm actually wearing leggings, and there's definitely some puke in my hair, just so there's no confusion. Starting out with preparation, notes, research ahead of time. I'm a huge fan of doing your research. Be informed going in. I even had someone say it as seriously as treat it like it's your job. One person suggested prepping with a notebook. They said that you can write in there the purpose of your visit plus the questions that you have in the order of priority so that you don't forget the most important piece. However, they also noted that it's a really fine line if you decide to do that. Some doctors take it really well if you go in with a notebook full of handwritten notes, but one person noted that printing out notes made the doctor look at them like they kind of went a little bit far. You can email your provider ahead of time with a list of questions so that they have time to research those questions. How that's received is going to be different depending on the doctor that you get, but the person who submitted that advice said that their mom is a provider and she really enjoys when the patient does that. I do think if I was a doctor, I would probably prefer it too, just so I can brush up. Doctors have a lot to remember about a lot of different conditions. So I think the little heads up is really nice, and I think I'll probably implement that one in the future. I could totally see it being well received if I emailed a doctor and said, hey, these are the questions and concerns that I have for the upcoming visit in case you want to brief yourself before I come in. But if not, I'm happy to just talk about it when I get there and you can disregard this email. In your notebook or your notes or even in your brain, make sure that you know in your head what the options might be, the definitions, the pros and cons of each test, and what other things they might bring up to you. As they give the information, you can write down the doctor's notes, a summary of what they're saying, what the answers to the questions are, what the next steps will be, and then when you come in for your future appointments, you can refer back to the notes that are right there on the previous pages of the same notebook. I'm going to move you over here so I can shamelessly pit two comments against each other. This one's going to be kind of a lot of reading, but I think it's important because I got two long and excellent comments, but they say literally polar opposite things from each other. So I want to tell you guys both of them and you can decide what works for you. But this is what I was talking about where I feel like I shouldn't just be giving you my advice because my advice alone will only be giving you one side of the story. This situation is exactly why I wanted to get crowdsourced information from you guys and not just regurgitate my own stuff. I never would have thought of both of these as conflicting issues. So here we go. Person A said, advocate professionally. Use sources doctors would use. Bring a copy of the article or study with you. Ask for it to be added to your chart. Consult the National Association for the condition. What is their testing or treatment protocol? And take a copy for the doctor. Write out a timeline of your medical history, concerns, and treatment. Keep a daily diary of symptoms and what you did and whether it worked. Include the pain scale number, temperature, blood pressure, pulse, whatever relates to your concern. If you know a nurse, you can take everything to them to see if they have a suggestion of other questions to ask or other information that you should provide. So that is one end of the spectrum. That is your super ready patient, very informed and prepared and organized. As a counter, person B said this, and I can totally see this being the case too. My mom had a hard time getting a diagnosis for something because, like you, she does a ton of research going into an appointment, so the doctors tended to roll their eyes and not listen. Pause for 1 sec. This happened to me with the neurologist last week, obviously. But one thing I didn't tell you guys about is that I read the notes afterwards, the after-visit summary, not the after-visit summary, but the visit notes where the doctor writes about you. And one of the things that the doctor wrote about me was that I had a tilt table test in January, and the tilt test was normal. And that wasn't true. I'm going to try to be a little bit more organized with the way that I tell this story. So I went in to get my tilt table test, and when I went to the cardiologist to discuss the results of my tilt table test, he said the results of my tilt table test were actually normal. So you know me, I dug, and even though my tilt table test was negative for POTS, it was positive for orthostatic hypotension, which we completely expected at the start of the test because it was Migraine Gen taking the test. Migraine Gen isn't very POTSy. So during the test, the people were noting that I was having all of these symptoms. I was complaining that I felt clammy, I felt sweaty, I felt like I was going to pass out, but I didn't end up passing out. And then whoever it was who read my numbers read them incorrectly and wrote down that I was negative for everything on the tilt table test. This was really weird because I didn't know why misinformation would be in my chart, but I think this happens all the time. Fast forward to the appointment with the cardiologist where he told me that my result was normal. I was really taken aback by that because I remembered that during the test I was extremely symptomatic, and feeling that symptomatic at home, Buddy definitely would have been alerting. I definitely wouldn't have stood up for 10 minutes straight without something happening to my vitals. And I take my vitals at home all the time, so I knew that my vitals were off, but for some reason they were saying my tilt test was normal. So I asked him, how much did my pulse increase upon standing? Because that's the definition for POTS. And he didn't know. I asked him what my blood pressure did. He told me that it dropped by 30 points, which is positive for orthostatic hypotension. Not that he was going to mention that if I hadn't asked, but now we know. Further testing later with a simple poor man's tilt test showed that I do have POTS, which we knew, but now it's in my chart that I took a tilt table test, I was complaining the whole time, and my vitals were normal. That's completely not what happened, but I can see how going into this doctor, she thought I was a hypochondriac because she thought that I was faking issues on a tilt table test like a year ago. So sometimes no matter how well you do getting all of your information, sometimes even just getting your vitals, the doctors are going to have it wrong. So that's why it's important to have your information all in a notebook with your notes. I don't actually have a notebook for my symptoms. I tend to go by memory. I know that's ironic, but that's one of the important things about keeping your own notes. Anyway, typical Jen, back on topic. This person's mom having a hard time getting a diagnosis for something because she's like me. She does a lot of research going into an appointment, so when she goes in, the doctors tended to roll their eyes and not listen. And I can imagine if this isn't her first doctor, it might be doctors who, like my neurologist, think that I'm crazy because she already thinks I did crazy things in cardiology. She said the time she was finally able to get a doctor to take her seriously, it was because she didn't mention the research. Instead, she made note of the words commonly used to describe the symptoms and made sure to use the ones applicable to her situation. Because she didn't mention the research, the doctor wasn't dismissive and actually listened, and even suggested that it may be the very thing that she was trying to guide him to. She was officially diagnosed not long after. So that's the battle of the two tactics. You don't really know how the doctor's going to react when you go in, but you could know everything, you could know nothing. Pros and cons, you'll have to pick. I wanted to open up with this example because I feel like this battle is a good thing for us to get into in a discussion in the comments. So let's talk about this. What do you guys think is actually the most effective way to handle a doctor's appointment when you already feel like you have an idea of what's going on? Do you think it's better to go in and tell the doctor that you've done your research and you feel pretty confident? Do you think it's better to sort of play it in the middle, which I think is more of what I do, where I say, hey, I found all of this stuff and I feel like it really matches, but I wanted to ask you if you think this is a good thing for me to be tested for? Or do you think the most conservative route is the way to go, like this person's mom, where they don't admit to doing any research and instead they just come in with a bunch of the buzzwords? I like that because that's kind of sneaky and it's a little bit less intimidating, but it's not something that I usually do because I usually snap back with facts and then they realize what happened. But let me know in the comments what you think the most effective way is, what you've done in the past, whether it's worked, or how you're changing up your strategy for the future. Let's move on to the next category. Bring a friend. Having a friend there to witness, be support, have reminders is really helpful. If you're like me, I kind of get a migraine if I get stressed and stuff, so it's nice to not be worried about driving home. I can just worry about the appointments and not the driving part, so it's also nice to have a friend for having the double D. If you are able to bring a friend, you can talk to them ahead of time about your goals for the appointment and the really big ticket items that you're hoping to accomplish with the appointment. If your time and your spoons allow, you can even go over the appointment ahead of time with your friend so that they can poke holes and fill in details for you. Preferably, this will be somebody who knows your situation. One subscriber said preferably a male because males tend to be taken more seriously. However, another subscriber mentioned that sometimes when the husband chimes in, that's not taken very well either, especially with female doctors. Female doctors don't seem to like husbands speaking for their wives. It probably comes off as controlling, even though sometimes it's necessary. In my case, sometimes it's totally necessary for my husband to chime in. I don't always remember. But if my husband is going to chime in an appointment, I will try to remember to gesture to him, like, "What do you think, honey?" so that she knows that I want him to talk. These are little nuances that you wouldn't expect from a professional interaction. Act the part, as in, don't go in there and seem like you are better than you are. Obviously, I film only at my best times. So if I went in looking like this, dressed a little bit professionally, my hair is clean, my makeup is on, the doctor isn't going to look at me and say, "This is a disabled woman." I need to stop doing that. "This is a disabled woman and her life is severely impacted." What she's not seeing is this is the first time I've showered in probably 2 weeks. I'm going to be a vegetable for the rest of the day because I'm in bright lights. And just about every sentence, I have to look back down at my notes because I can't remember more than one sentence at a time. And in fact, I'm needing to take 2, 3, 4, 5 takes sometimes of some of these sentences because I stutter so badly. But all of that stuff doesn't really matter because I'm presenting so well. And it's really hard for a human, a doctor, to see past that bias. So I got a comment from a subscriber whose sister has fibromyalgia, and she received this advice from her doctors and psychologists. If you have an invisible chronic disease, in order for you and your pain to be taken seriously, don't go to the appointment looking too put together. Don't wear makeup, wear simple clothes, and have the overall demeanor of someone who's in pain or not doing well. My sister looks nice and masks her symptoms on really bad days, and this tip has really changed how eager her doctors were to help. And I regret to inform you that 10 out of 10 I can confirm that this happens, because this happened with my husband's voice. My husband is a really social guy, really likes to make people happy, make people's day, and just have a good time chatting every time he meets someone. But when his voice was hurting, he lost his voice and wasn't able to talk for a couple of years. He had to be really careful about how he acted during those appointments. Even though he's social and he wanted to be smiling with the doctor, he had to be really careful to not be too happy or expressive or engaged because most of his pain was in this sort of side of his face, neck area. And most of his chief complaints were inability to talk, pain with making expressions, etc. So in the doctor's office, you're like, okay, I need to tell them everything that's wrong. I need to, have this conversation. They need to know that I'm with it. But it's a fine line between looking like you're with it and looking like you're too with it and you don't need their help. Control your emotions. Stay calm and polite at all costs. When was the last time you changed your mind because someone yelled at you or snapped at you? Probably never. And let's elaborate on being polite at all costs. You can either be fully honest or you can be fully polite, but you can't really fully be both. How honest you can be with someone depends partially on your ability to have tact and to say things politely, and partially on the other person's ability to listen and receive feedback. You need to balance your skill at tact with their skill at listening. If you get to a doctor who's really receptive, listens really well, and is even able to take feedback, then you're able to be a lot more honest with them, and you're still being polite when you're being honest. But if the doctor is more defensive and easily hurt, then it's going to take a lot more tact for you to be honest while still being polite. So the goal is to be as polite as possible, but not at the cost of honesty. This stuff is easy enough in hindsight if you hear about a situation or if you're trying to plan ahead for a situation, but in the moment, it's actually a lot easier said than done. Remember that you're not there to make friends. You don't need to downplay what you're feeling or act happy when you're not, and that's not rude to do. It doesn't impress anybody if you're tough or if you're friendly through all your symptoms. You're just minimizing the chances that you're actually going to get help from the doctor. Explain your situation carefully, Be to the point, but don't over-explain because that can sound like you're complaining or like you're whining. I feel like this section is ending abruptly, but that's what I've got, so let's move on. This is another one that contradicts what I just said, only a tiny bit. The contrast to don't over-explain yourself is repeat yourself. Both are pretty important. So, the doctor is not Google. You may be an expert on your condition, but you're not their only patient, and they don't know everything that's on Google. I thought this was a really clever way to say it, but somebody submitted, as humans, they're telling you their impression in that moment. If their advice has not helped, go after the problem again. Only if they hear from you again will they know that it has not improved by their advice, and they can give you further advice or diagnosis. And I will add to that there is no limit to the number of times that you're allowed to ask the doctor a question. If it doesn't work, ask again. If that doesn't work, change your wording. And if it still isn't working, don't change your wording. You know, the doctor in my video last week said that I would have had meningitis by now. I was like, yeah, but when's by now? She's like, by now. Okay, yeah, but how long is that? She said, you said it's been years that you've had symptoms, right? Yeah, you definitely would have meningitis by now. So I repeated, yeah, but how long does it take for the meningitis to come? I'm asking for a ballpark range. I know that no two situations are going to be exactly the same. And then my husband finally chimed in, are you talking days? You talking weeks? Talking months? And then she finally said months. Within a few months, you will get meningitis. That was an example of needing to ask over and over and repeat myself in order to get an answer from the doctor. The purpose of gathering specifics is not to prove the doctor right or wrong. The purpose is to have concrete information that you can actually do something with. If she said, I would have had meningitis by now, and I left it there, that would not have been as useful. Since I got the information within a couple of months from her, I was able to actually research what she had said. I would not have been able to research by now. That's too vague. That's not useful, tangible information to me. That's the doctor trying to skirt the question because she didn't remember. And like I said, that's fair. The doctor is a human. The doctor is not Google. We'll get to that later, but it's also important now. Everyone's favorite point, educate. Educate your doctor. This is controversial, I think. A lot of people see doctors as authority figures, and it's rude to educate them if they are incorrect. But I personally see this as customer service. I don't think that the doctor is above me at all. In fact, I think I'm paying them. I think I'm in charge. And I don't mean that in an arrogant or in a dominant way. What I mean by that is we are two individuals. I have a problem, and I expect to receive the services that I'm paying for. A couple weeks ago, we got a retaining wall built in our backyard. I had a problem. The problem was I needed a retaining wall. So I called a company. I said, hey, come build the retaining wall. They came, they did it. I paid them for their services. When they did something that I didn't like, I said, hey, I like it better this way, or I heard it's supposed to be done this way. And then they can reply with, oh, well, we think it's better to do it this way, so that's why we did it that way. I know I'm being vague, so this is a lot of this way and that way. But if it's okay for me to dictate that about rocks that are in my backyard, why is it not okay to dictate that about my treatment plan, about my health, on my body, about my life, because my life is compromised by my symptoms in my body? Hold your horses one more time before you at me. I completely respect the doctor. I respect the doctor's training. I respect their education. I respect their intelligence. But that does not mean that they get to do a bad job. Do a respectful job. The respect level stays the same. Don't do your job, and I'm going to start trying to fill in where you're not doing your job. Because if you don't do your job, then I have to stay disabled. That's the reality of it. I got a couple of comments after I made my doctor post last time of people saying that, I'm just and I just want to complain and I'm power hungry and I just want to dominate over all these doctors. That's still not the case. I'm not in this to be aggressive. I don't want to do the research. I want the doctor to do the research. I don't have time for this crap. I just want to feel better. I hope that you guys understand that. Okay, so educating the doctor. If they're incorrect, I think it's okay to say it, but I also think that there are right ways and wrong ways to say it. When the doctor said that allergies could cause a metallic taste in my mouth, you guys know I totally disagreed with that. I don't think that that's possible. But I didn't say you're wrong because I don't know if she's wrong. Maybe she's seen it. I know what I don't know. Instead of me saying, you're wrong, allergies can't taste metallic, you can bring it down a notch. I think that's incorrect. You can bring it down another notch. Are you sure? But I like bringing it down as many notches as you can possibly bring it down. And for me, that means asking a follow-up question when I disagree. This could be allergies. I say, can allergies have a metallic taste? Would allergies be consistent with my nasal drippings having high glucose? These are very polite ways of saying that sounds wrong. The final piece for this section, know when to quit. Yes, part of that is know what you don't know, but part of that is if this doctor just isn't working out, if you're pretty sure they're not going to be your forever doctor, then you don't need to keep wasting your breath. This is another one where I got some conflicting advice from you guys. Some people say the more you share, potentially the better it is for the next patient who comes in with your symptoms. But the more you say, the more inaccurate information about you can be put into your chart for the next person to see, like how this doctor saw my inaccurate information from the cardiologist. So the more you push, if they're really not convinced, the more incorrect information about you being a hypochondriac or you doing all this research could end up in your chart. And you can always go get your diagnosis elsewhere and then come back with the harder evidence. So you guys bet your bottom dollar, if I end up being a leaker and I get confirmation that I'm leaking, I'm going to take a physical copy of the test or exam that shows that I'm a leaker. I'm going to go back to this doctor and I'm going to say, hi, I was leaking. And we're going to have a really awkward and uncomfortable conversation about the symptoms I was having and how dismissive she was. And I don't want to have that conversation because I'm not a confrontational person, but I'm doing it for the next patient who walks into those doors with the same problems as me and says, I think I'm leaking, so that this doctor can't do to them what she's putting me through. I know if someone had done that before me, I wouldn't be going through this now. Guys, what if she finds my YouTube? Hey, honey. Discussing options. All right, if you get to the point where you are discussing options, first of all, high five. Lucky you. How did you pull that off? Then my advice for you is to have unrealistic goals. Just kidding. Have realistic goals. I just so confidently said to have unrealistic goals. No. Have realistic goals. You cannot walk into the doctor's office expecting the doctor to fix you. Instead, you need to walk into the doctor's office expecting a conversation about whether you should be tested for something, about whether there are ways to improve your quality of life, or about whether there are ways that you can manage your symptoms. You're not going into the doctor to ask for them to fix you. The doctor cannot fix you. The doctor can only suggest the tools that they have available to them, which is more tools than you have. So that's cool. If it's a doctor that you get along with well and you trust, and you've built up a rapport with them, you can also ask them what they would do if it was them in your shoes. But the person who submitted this tip also said that if it's a dismissive doctor, then this doesn't go as well. I love this next section. I feel like of all the sections, this is probably the most important section. If you get nothing else from this entire video, make sure that you get this phrase. Trust the doc, but the doc is human. What this means is that you need to trust in the doctor's abilities, but you also can lessen your frustration and your mental pain by acknowledging that they're human and they're not perfect. This means that if something doesn't go according to plan, an appointment didn't go well, or you end up being underdiagnosed or untreated, that doesn't mean that you did something wrong. It doesn't mean that you described things wrong or that you need to try harder to cope and be healthy. It doesn't mean that now you just need to fake it till you make it. It just means that this was a really complicated human interaction that didn't go to completion. All we can do at every appointment is make sure that we make some progress forward. And even if we don't feel like we actually made progress forward, completing that appointment is a step forward. I thought that the way that this person said it was a great way to put it, so I'm going to read this to you real quick. Sometimes different ways of communication or perception on both sides can cause being misdiagnosed, misunderstood, or untreated. Sometimes this is not an evil part of the doctor or of you, just a typical human thing. It often helps me personally to lessen the frustration when I make doctors human again, especially when they are approachable, sensible persons, but I haven't dared to reapproach them for the same thing. And it helps me to dare and reapproach them. And finally, emotional recovery. If you've never been to a doctor appointment where you needed time for emotional recovery, consider yourself extremely lucky, because I think in the chronic illness community, too many of us have. Pick yourself up again after frustrating encounters and try to keep advocating for yourself. Keep moving forward. Don't give up. Sometimes you have to come to terms with your disease, learn how to handle it and how to cope with it. But if you are underdiagnosed or if you're untreated, I really think that you should keep at it. After the appointment, if you do need to take time, do it. I've certainly done that. I've taken mental health breaks after appointments because they didn't go very well. I just didn't feel ready to keep going and fighting for myself yet. But I've mentioned this before, that this is a marathon, not a sprint. Mental health is just as important as physical health. And slowing down for a little bit is definitely going to slow down your progress. But it's not worth running yourself into the ground trying to get a diagnosis as fast as possible if it's ruining your quality of life in the meantime. I personally need to make sure that I'm back at my emotional baseline before I can go making appointments again. And I personally prefer to do that even if things are a little bit postponed while I do so. I don't go too extra with it. I wait maybe a few days or up to a week until I don't have an emotional reaction when I think about the appointment anymore. And then full speed ahead. Because even though I'm okay with losing a little bit of time during my diagnosis process, I don't want to lose that much. I want to keep going, pushing, fighting, making sure that I get my diagnoses, because if this is treatable, then life could be very, very different for me soon. And maybe for you too, if you're kind of in limbo like I am. So guys, I really hope that all of this helped you. I'm dying to know how you guys feel about these tips, especially about the ones that sort of contradict with each other, because it sounds like all of us have had pretty differing experiences with doctors. I think the way to make this video as useful as possible for the people who are happening to stumble upon it is to have actual real-world examples in the comments of how each of these techniques played out in real life with a doctor. So if you've tried any of this advice before, and if it worked or even if it didn't, please let me know in the comments, share your story, and let me know what you think you're going to try differently next time. I really need new ways to sign off, so for today, toodaloo.